Thank you. Well, we've sung How Great is Our God. Now we're going to see in the Bible how great our God is. But the question I think we need to walk away from here this morning with is, how great is my God? How great is your God? Because when we're talking just about God out there in the abstract and God out there somewhere else, it's not the same as when we apply it to our life individually. So the question I want you to have in the back of your mind is, but how great is my God today? We're in the book of Joshua, and if you open your Bibles and just kind of open it somewhere around chapter 6, we're going to be going 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we're going to get to 10. But I want you to just kind of follow along to get the context as I'm saying things. Your eyes may fall on some things there to guide you through it. But the focal point of today's message is these verses that we find in chapter 10 and verse number 12 that you have there in your bulletin. Joshua 10:12 says, "On the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel." Now stop right here. This isn't a little prayer in your prayer closet. This isn't a prayer where you're kneeling down and it's just you and God. This is a prayer, a public prayer, expressed out loud in front of God and everybody that was there. So everyone knew what he was saying, and everyone would know if God was listening or not. That, to me, that's a big deal. Sometimes you and I pray prayers, and then if it doesn't happen, nobody knew it. But Joshua is standing up in the heat of the battle, in the middle of the day, in front of all of his soldiers, and probably even within the ability to hear of some of his enemies. And he said, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. Now, this is not any little thing in the Bible. This is kind of really big. Because if you can't trust this verse in the Bible, you really can't trust any. If this didn't happen, if this isn't true, then everything else is suspect. So I want you to gather the importance of what's going on here. And the question is, what would lead someone to pray such a prayer? Number one. Number two, did it really happen? And number three, can we or should we pray this boldly in our world today? As we go through this book, I have to start back where Marcel was last week in Joshua chapter 6. Because we find that Joshua had learned some lessons in Canaan. Since coming in, yes, he went in, and now he had a few battles. What you learned last week is, as far as Jericho was concerned, was the following from Joshua chapter 6. Number one, Jericho's strategy was all God's. There was nothing about the attack of Jericho that said, this is a brilliant military mind behind this. This strategy is not in any war book, okay? As we go to this place, we're going to walk around the city one time a day for 6 days, and then we're going to go the seventh day, we're going to go around 7 times. That's not anywhere. I find it very interesting. Did anybody notice they broke the Sabbath? Anybody notice that? Just didn't know if he mentioned that or not. I just think it's kind of interesting that one of the great victories, they broke one of the commands. But that's a different issue. But they're obeying God, and here they are. Jericho's strategy was all God's strategy. But the second thing we find is that all Israel had to do was obey. They just had to do it. It didn't have to make sense. They didn't even have to, let's say, completely believe it if they were out marching. They just had to do what God had told them to do. And what we find here is that Jericho in our life is an example of living by faith and walking in the Spirit. When God told Joshua, this is what I want you to do, he, by faith, called the generals together and said, this is what we're going to do. That is faith. Even when it sounds really strange, even when you're not really sure exactly how it's going to happen, but it was by faith. 3 weeks ago on the Saturday, I was listening to Radiolab on NPR, and they were talking about this, and that kind of piqued my attention. So I stopped the car while I ate my snow cone and listened to what they were saying. It was hot that day. And so I'm listening to this, and it's talking about how much sound would it take. And as they were going through it, they said there were 7 shofars, and so of course they measured it, and they did all that and figured it all out. And basically as they went through, they made fun of the story in the Bible. They just have one problem. The walls fell down. Didn't have to make sense. Didn't even have to be scientifically sound. That was not the point. And they left themselves a little wiggle room all the way through it. They'd do all this and how much would it take and blah, 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 and it would take this much and you'd have to have so many and they only had 7 and blah, 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 blah. And when it was all said and done, so unless there was a miracle involved, I'm going, yeah, there was that thing called God. And he did say that, and you do have these walls that are down. So somewhere in here, it doesn't always have to make sense for God to do it. And so Joshua learned a little something. Now you would have hoped he would have got it all. But the more I study Joshua, the more he sounds like us. And then we get to Ai, okay? That's the next chapter in chapter 7. And this is Ai chapter 1 because there were 2 things. As you begin to chapter 7, you say, the men come to Joshua and say, look, Ai is not a really big deal compared to Jericho. So why don't send everybody. Let's just send maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people. We can handle the 12,000 that are there. Here's the problem. Ai's strategy was man's strategy. They didn't even ask God what he should do. They didn't go to him and say, God, you gave us such a great victory before. We don't even want to leave here without asking you, what should we do? No. They said, we can handle this. Got a question. Have you ever launched out and thought, I can handle this, only to find out you couldn't? Anybody done that? Raise your hand. The rest of you must have arm problems. Okay. It's all man. When we look at this chapter, they thought they could handle things. They said, we got this covered. God, not going to bother you with this. This is just a simple little thing that we can handle. Ai is an example of living in the flesh. This is what we think we can do. We can handle this. This is no big deal. This is just a little thing in life. We can handle it. If they had gone to God, if they had consulted with him about what was going on, he would have told them, you have a problem with sin in the camp, and you better deal with it, or I cannot be with you. But they didn't. And so off they go to the battle. What happens? The people of Ai come back, and 36 of them die along the way. They had never lost anyone in battle. This was a crushing blow. And Joshua tears his clothing, falls on the ground, says a bunch of stupid things if you go and read that. And God basically says, Joshua, get up and deal with the sin. Get up and deal with the stuff that you have around you. So he did. Then we get to Joshua chapter 8. This is what we call Ai number 2. Now he says, what do you want me to do, Lord? Ha! Lesson learned. He went to, what do you want me to do? And he said, okay, this time you're going to go and the strategy is going to be different. You're going to take all 30,000 of your men. You're going to send 5,000 in front and you're going to put 25,000 hidden behind. And then you're going to go like you're going to attack them. They're going to come out. You're going to turn around and run. And when they all come out chasing you, the rest of you are going to go in. You're going to take the city. You're going to set it on fire. And when I see the smoke, going to turn around and we're going to get them in the middle and we're going to eliminate Ai. Then you can go into the city and all the stuff that you find, y'all divide it up amongst yourself. Well, that was different. Joshua could have said, but wait, I like that walking around, falling down stuff. That's a strategy I like. This is like fighting and hiding, and why don't we just do it that way? And you know, last time we got in trouble because we took some of the stuff. Maybe you just better keep, no, see, it was different. Don't get enamored by how God did something at a particular time. He may not always do it that way. The key to Ai the second time around was very simple. Listen to God and obey. Listen to God and obey. Guess what? They listened to God, they obeyed, and what happened? Everybody in Ai was destroyed. The big problem of a few days ago was no longer a problem. Now, this is a big one. Now things change. Now their reputation precedes them. Things are going on ahead, and people have heard how they obliterated Jericho, and now even Ai, who once had defeated them, now they defeated Ai. So you get to chapter 9, and the people from the town of Gibeon says, we're next. They're going to wipe us out. In fact, they had heard that everybody in Canaan was to be destroyed. God had told them, I don't want you to make a treaty with anybody in this area. I want you to kill every one of them. And you're saying, that sounds really bad. That's a whole other message, okay? But this is what I told. So the Gibeonites said, listen, if we don't make a treaty with them, they're going to kill us. So let's do this. We're going to send a few people. We're going to dress them up in really old, dusty clothes. We're going to give them really old, molded bread. We're going to give them wineskins that are old and long. And we're going to come to them and we're going to tell them that we come from a long way away. We come from a long way away, and that we have heard of everything they have done and the power of their God. And even though we're from a long way away, we want them to make a treaty with us. They tried to deceive them. They didn't try to fight them. They just thought, let's deceive them. And what happened? Well, as they came up, they met them there, and it says in verse 14 of chapter 9, it says, so the Israelites examined their food. In other words, at first they said, how do we know where you're not just from around here? No. Look at all of our stuff. All of our stuff, we've come from a long way. So the Israelites examine their food. Would you read the next few words for me? But they did not consult the Lord. They examined their food, but they did not consult the Lord. I want to read something from Numbers chapter 27, verse 21. Because the Lord told Moses, now Moses, I want you to get Joshua, take him to the high priest, who is Eleazar, and as you're there, I want the whole people to know that everything I've given you, I'm giving you. I literally want you to hand over the baton of leadership. I want them to know from your lips, this is the next one. And listen to verse 21. When direction from the Lord is needed, Joshua will stand before Eleazar the priest, who will use the Urim. Now, some of you, make sure you get that right. Urim, U-R-I-M. One of the sacred lots cast before the Lord to determine his will. He said, there is a way so that if something comes up that I have not dealt with in the written word, you're not sure, don't wing it. Don't depend on your own understanding. Come to me, and the high priest can come to me, and I will show them exactly what they should do. For an exact moment like this, when people came and they said, we want to make a treaty, but something just seems a little fishy. Something's just not right. How do I know for sure? He said, when that happens, just come to me and I'll show you. I'll show you. But guess what? They didn't. They trusted in their own understanding and they regretted it. While they were fixing this treaty and fixing the celebration for the treaty, which was going to be in 3 days, somebody went a little further down and said, wait a minute, there's the city of Gibeon. If he had had Google Maps, he could have saved himself a lot of trouble, but he didn't. And he thought Gibeon was a long way away, but it was really just a neighbor down the road. But by this point, he had given his word. And you got to admire the guy. He gave his word, and he did it. Even when it was a mistake, he gave his word, and he did it. Now let's make sure we got the lessons learned. If you do what God says and obey, follow his strategy, you can take down Jericho. When you try to do it your way in your strength, remember the lesson at Ai. God changes from place to place and situation to situation exactly what the strategy is going to be. But if you will listen to him, he'll show you. And if you obey, you will get the victory. And no matter how confusing things are and what people may say, they may be trying to deceive you. So always go to God. Now, may I say this? Those are some hard lessons to learn. You and I are blessed that we can read from his mistakes. We can learn from his mistakes. You know what our biggest problem is? So often we don't even learn from our own mistakes. We fall over and over and over again. We're enslaved to sin. Even though the Bible says we are no longer slaves to sin, but we fall for it over and over. Not because we have to. We simply didn't learn. But I am so glad to report Joshua learned. By the time we get to Joshua chapter 10, Joshua acts like a guy who cannot fail. He's got it down. Now notice the big stuff that happens here. Number one, Joshua's circumstances are the most difficult he had faced in the promised land. It begins by saying, 5 kings get together. Now, mind you, these kings hated each other's guts. But they had a common enemy, and the common enemy was who? Joshua and the Israelites. The Gibeonites had made a treaty, so these 5 kings go, well, we're not going to pick directly on Joshua because he has beat up on Ai and he has beat up on Jericho, so we're going to slam the Gibeonites. So now 5 kings against 1 king that have an alliance with Joshua. Now notice what happens here. His circumstances were the most difficult. Some of the difficult circumstances were his own fault. I want you to notice something. Some of the situations you and I find ourselves in today are not God's fault. They're not even the devil's fault. They're our own fault. We did things, we made mistakes, we didn't ask the Lord's direction, we thought we could do it our way, and some things that we deal with are our own fault. Now that doesn't mean we can't overcome it. Let's just admit it. It was our own fault. But the other things that happened, some were just simply, it just came with the territory. They were going to have to face those kings sooner or later. And God just kind of said, let's do an economy of effort. Let's whoop all 5 at once instead of just 1 at a time. Let's have 1 big battle instead of 5 smaller battles. And so here they are. They're all gathered together. Now he is defending people that deceived him because he gave his word. Now he is having to attack or being attacked by 5 kings. So let's read this again now in context. Chapter 5. So those 5 Amorite kings combined their armies for a united attack. They moved all their troops into a place and attacked Gibeon. The men of Gibeon quickly sent messengers to Joshua at his camp in Gilgal. Don't abandon your servants now, they pleaded. Come at once, save us, help us, for all the Amorite kings who live in the hill country have joined forces to attack us. So Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. Do not be afraid of them, the Lord said to Joshua, for I have given you victory over them. Not a single one of them will be able to stand up to you. Now stop. When God says not a single one of them has anything over you, nobody can go against you. I don't know about you. I think I'd kind of go, okay, so let's push the envelope a little bit. When you've got that certainty from God, and it says, so Joshua traveled all night from Gilgal and took the Amorite armies by surprise. The Lord threw them into a panic, and the Israelites slaughtered great numbers of them at Gibeon. Then the Israelites chased the enemy along the road to Beth Horon, killing them all along the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Beth Horon, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstone from heaven. They continued until they reached Azekah. The hail killed more of the enemy than the Israelites killed with their sword. On the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. He said, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, the moon stayed in its place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. Is this event not recorded in the book of Jasher? The sun stayed in the middle of the sky and it did not set as on a normal day. There has never been a day like this one before or since, when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. Now you get the context? You get what all's going on? You get why he is all excited, why he can stand up and pray the most awesome, bold prayer out loud in public for everyone to hear. Wow. What were Joshua's reactions to his difficult circumstances? And may I say, these 4 things should be yours in my reaction to circumstances. Number 1, he listened to God and believed what God said to him. He listened to God and he believed what God said. I think sometimes we don't listen to God. I think other times we hear him, but we don't pay attention. Or we hear him and we don't believe what he says. Joshua, because of what he had been through, he listened and he believed. Verse 9, he showed strength and courage. Strength and courage. What did God tell Joshua at the beginning there of the book? He said, be strong and very what? Courageous. So he's going, okay, that's what he told me to do. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take off. We're going to take off at night. We're going to take off at night uphill to Gibeon. We're going to catch them by surprise. When God says nobody's going to be able to beat you, that means you can go on super drive. It wasn't, wait, let's travel a little bit, rest. No, they traveled and traveled and traveled and came upon them and attacked the enemy, and the enemy did not know what to do. As they were fighting, he let God fight for them. It says when they got there, God threw the armies into panic. Now, mind you, there are 5 different armies. This is not one cohesive fighting force. These are 5 groups of people who for many years had been enemies of each other, now had been put together. Now they are scared because they're being attacked. They don't know who has their back. They don't know who's for them. They start fighting among themselves. And the Israelites take advantage, and they're just whooping up on them. They start running away. As they're running away, it says they're now running downhill. And as they're running downhill, God steps in again, and he sends hail. How many of you been through a hailstorm? Anybody been through a hailstorm? Have you realized that the only way to stay away from a hailstorm is get inside? I mean, hail is not particular. I remember when we were in Spain with the Time group, we were there. I see a smile. She remembers. We're inside the church and the hailstorm starts. I remember this poor BMW. It was getting pelted. It was just bing, 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 bing. And it was coming down everywhere. And some trees were falling. And all of us Miami kids are going, whoa, cool. And all Spaniards are going, you idiots. And then our kids go, that's ice. Nobody gives us ice. So they all get cups to go out and get the hail so we can have ice with our drinks. We're brilliant kids you raised. Anyway, so they're out there. And they're getting, but But what happened is the hailstorm that it talks about here, it says in other versions, hail was as big as stones. But it only hit the other people. Oh, that's smart hail. This is amazing. The Israelites are chasing. I can hear the story. I was running, I was about to let this guy have it, and whap! Got hit by hail, and I ducked just in case. But nothing happened to me. It just hit him. If you read the story, it says God killed more people with hail than they killed with the sword. Why? So they wouldn't make the same mistake they made at Jericho, thinking, man, we're good. When they walked away from that one, they're going, how great is our God? I want him on my side every battle. They're killing. And Joshua let God fight for them. He called on God in verse 12 to do what only God could do in order to achieve a total victory. Last year, we studied the book of Acts, and one of the things that happened in this pandemic Christianity was God did what man could not do. And we see it here in the Old Testament. Joshua called on God to do what he couldn't do. Have you ever thought, I just wish I had more hours in the day? Any of you thought that? Have you ever stood before everybody in your job and say, I'm going to pray that the Lord stop the sun now so we can finish this? You're going, no. Smart move. Smart move. But you know what? Joshua did. So I think we better stop right here. The question is, could that have happened? And did that happen? Did the sun and moon really stand still? And I say this because, listen to me. Those of you in high school, middle school, college, and those of you general humans, that includes everybody. Somebody that reads a little bit of the Bible is going to come to this passage and say, this Bible thing, I don't know. Talk about this story about this guy telling the sun to stand still. And here's the first thing they'll say. I almost guarantee it. They say, issue number one, the sun is not revolving around the earth. We are much more enlightened now than back in those days. We know the sun doesn't go around. So to say to the sun, stop sun, that's kind of ridiculous. Now, how many of you go, yeah. Yeah, that's just, yeah. That shows the Bible's just an antiquated old book. Well, let me ask you something. How many of you have ever used what we'll call a language of observation? In other words, you expressed as you see it. You're going, what do you mean? Well, how many of you ever used the word sunrise and sunset? Well, duh, the sun doesn't rise. The sun doesn't set. Oh, yeah. But that's the way we express it. We're not giving, when we say, I was out at the beach when the sun rose, we're not giving a scientific explanation for the rotation of the world and the sun. We're not doing that. We're just making observations. And that's exactly what he was doing. So give him a break on that one. You still have another one. You say, okay, so if it wasn't the sun, so did the earth actually stop? What would happen if the earth as fast as it's going, and I'm sure a few science teachers could tell me I forgot that part because I didn't care, all right? And if the earth did stop, what would happen? Well, if you didn't have your seatbelt on, I guarantee you would fly. Gravity would be no more, and all of a sudden we're all going out into outer space. Is that correct, science teachers? Am I about right? If there is no gravity, we're all going to take off and probably all head in the same direction for a while. Let me give you several explanations. Some people talk in terms that there was prolonged light from a temporary tilting of the earth on its axis. Ta-da! See, at this point you're going, he is not a scientist, and you're right, but I can read, so listen carefully. Number two, that there was a local refraction of the rays of the sun, just like there was local darkness in Egypt while the Israelites had light. Remember that? And so there was a refraction. God changed a little something and it changed everything. That's another one. Some people say, well, it's really just allegorical. It's not that they added more time or more sun. God just simply refreshed them to where they got over their all-night march, their all-day fight, and gave them enough strength to do it some more till they finally got it done. Or maybe he just speeded them up so they could do it real fast before the day was over. That last one was mine. That was not scientific at all. That was just me. Here's maybe the better explanation. The slowing of the rotation of the earth. You're going, how is that any better? Well, in Dallas Morning News, May 7, 1973, Donald Campbell wrote that a storm that happened on August 4th of 1972 was so big that it probably slowed down the spinning of the earth, causing the day to go longer than it normally would. This was back in 1972. Some of you that were alive were going, I thought it seemed a little longer that day. I don't know. But other people have noted that the Egyptians, the Chinese, and the ancient Indian writings have a record of a longer day. And it was at about the same time of the record of what we're talking about here in Joshua. In the Harvard Observatory, Professor Pickering, in the article, in the chronology of the history of the rotation of the earth, there's almost one full day missing. In a study that was done and an article that appeared by the name Mathematical Rotation Checks, as they were trying to figure the rotations of the earth so that they would know where to send satellites where, looking forward, they also went backwards. And they discovered that there was possibly about 23 days, 23 hours, and 20 minutes unaccounted for. You're going, Russell, you're way over my head. Don't worry, I'm way over mine too. But I'll tell you something. I've read this kind of stuff over the years. Different times, different things. And as it happens in so many times, we try to find a physical explanation for the miraculous. But the bottom line is this. What happens if it was true? Why could it not be true if God says it's true? The real issue here is not these dilemmas. The real issue is, how big is your God? How big is your God? See, because as we go through and we think about this, If God can't do this miracle, then he can't do any miracle. And he is confined then by his own creation. I love what one guy said. He said the following: if you can believe the first verse of the Bible, the rest is frosting on the cake. What's the first verse? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Once you get that one settled, the rest is easy. If God created the heaven and the earth, then he can slow it down whenever he wants to. If God created the heavens and the earth, then his son can stop and tell the wind and the seas to be still, and they obey him. If God created the heavens and the earth, then every one of his creation is subject to him. That's why his son could heal on the spot anyone he wanted to. That is why he could do the things he did. That is why on the first day of the week, the women went to the tomb, and he was not there, for he is risen as he said. The question is, how big is your God? C.S. Lewis said, the mind that asks for non-miraculous Christianity is a mind that is in the processing of relapsing from real Christianity into mere religion. Go over verse 14 again. There has never been a day like this one before or since when the Lord answered such a prayer. Surely the Lord fought for Israel on that day. Remember, they were fighting the Canaanites. The greatest deities in the Canaanites were the sun and the moon. That is who they worshiped above everything. And when Joshua screams out a prayer and says, let the sun stop, that means that the major deities of the Canaanites were listening to Joshua. That the God of Joshua was more powerful than their gods. And when this day just seemed like it would never end, I'm sure more than one thought, we're toast either way. We've had it. Because if our gods are subject to the God, we don't stand a chance. As I read on, and the wonderful part about these messages, it's going right along with my personal reading. And the last couple of days, I'm reading chapter 11. Listen to the last verse of chapter 11. So Joshua took control of the entire land, just as the Lord had instructed Moses. He gave it to the people of Israel as their special possession, dividing the land among the tribes. So the land finally had rest from war. The last verse of chapter 12. In all, 31 kings were defeated. 31 different kings. 31 different rulers of stuff that God did not want in the land of Canaan. And every single one of them was defeated. I remind you, what we're talking about here is a promised life. We're not talking about territory. You and I aren't going to go out and find the Jericho and run around it. But there are at least in most of our lives, 31 strongholds of sin. The stuff that's keeping us from living the abundant life God wants us to live. Would you do me a favor? Learn the lesson from Joshua. You're never going to handle it in your own strength. You've tried turning that leaf over so many times, you've had another tree grow in the process. You're not going to do it on your own. It's going to be God. But once you learn the lessons, once you learn the lessons of Jericho, Ai, Gibeon, take it all to God. Say to God, God, do what you've got to do and give me the strength to do what I need to do so that nothing gets in my way. All of a sudden, they fall like dominoes. Kingdom 1, boom, 2, boom, 3. Read chapter 12. It's the most boring chapter in the world till you get to the last one. It's the king of this and the king of that. And it's all the king of people you don't know and places you don't care. But it meant a lot to them. Make a list of the areas in your life that are real struggles. Make a list of those things that you've tried for years to get over. Those things that have kept you from living the abundant life that He's given you. Put them all up. And then put them all before the Lord. Say, God, I need you to do something I can't do myself. I need you to give me victory over this. I'm going to ask the musicians to come back. I want us to sing the song we sang right before the offering. But I want you to change the song. Is that okay? Just one little word. One little word to apply it to the message. I'm no longer a slave of, what does the song say? Fear. You know, that's kind of like saying I'm no longer a slave to Jericho when there was really 31 cities. So let's change the word. I'm no longer a slave to sin. I am a child of God. Because the Bible tells us we do not have to be slaves to sin. We have been given every spiritual resource necessary to not be in slavery to whatever sin is now enslaving us. And as we sing this song, I'm going to ask you to sing it, but to examine your own heart. What kingdom is standing in your way of being able to say, the Lord cleaned it all out? What's getting in the way? And then go to the Lord and say, Lord, take care of this. Help me. Guide me. Give me the instructions I need to get over this issue in my life. Would you stand and sing this prayer to Him?